Now, I do want to take you out to this live image that we have over Beirut in Lebanon as a ceasefire is now in effect between Israel and Hezbollah, hours after Israel approved the U.S. proposed agreement. However, I do want to pop this tweet up for you on your screen there, as the Israel War Room is saying that ceasefire may have already technically been breached within hours. The page stating, quote, the IDF reports multiple vehicles carrying suspected terrorists entered a restricted area in southern Lebanon, violating the agreement. Now, the ceasefire was effective as of 4 this morning local time. That was about 9 p.m. Eastern time last night. While this does mean a pause in fighting, it does not mean an end to the battle that's been brewing between the two for months now. So much to discuss as always, so I do want to bring in Alex Traiman, CEO and Jerusalem Bureau Chief at the Jewish News Syndicate. As always, Alex, thank you so much for taking the time to join us and break down a very involved and complicated subject here.
Josh, thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first off, I want to talk about that ceasefire agreement and what we know about it. Can you break down for folks out there what we know about what's included in the ceasefire agreement that was proposed by the U.S. and accepted by Israel and apparently Hezbollah?
Right. Well, first, you mentioned apparently Hezbollah. Hezbollah is not an official party to the agreement. The agreement is between Israel and Lebanon. It calls for a cessation of hostilities between the two sides, but it calls for a staged withdrawal of the IDF from southern Lebanon over a period of 60 days. The Lebanese army is supposed to replace the IDF in southern Lebanon. They'll be permitted to move in to southern Lebanon already from the beginning of the ceasefire, which already took effect at 4 a.m. in the morning here in Israel and in Lebanon. And they are supposed to further dismantle Hezbollah capabilities and infrastructure that they find to make sure that Hezbollah doesn't rebuild its capabilities in southern Lebanon. That includes both its presence south of the Litani River near the Israeli border and also the bringing in of weapons into the area such that they could attack Israel. UNIFIL, the United Nations international inspectors, will return to their position of trying to ensure that the ceasefire agreement is maintained. In addition, there will be a mechanism, a committee, which includes the United States and France, to sort of guarantee or provide some oversight on UNIFIL and the Lebanese army with regard to enforcing the agreement. There is a clause in the agreement that states that both the IDF, Israel, and Lebanon will be able to respond to immediate threats to preserve their right to self-defense. And it has also been reported that there is a side letter between Israel and the United States guaranteeing Israeli freedom of action if they feel that Hezbollah is violating the agreement and causing threats to the Israeli home front.
We talked about this a little already, but this is being referred to as a U.S. proposed agreement that was agreed to by Israel. So my question is, what role overall has the U.S. played in this ceasefire and really in general here?
Well, the U.S. has been trying to broker ceasefire agreements between Israel and Hamas in the Gaza Strip and between Israel and Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, really since the war began. Prime Minister Netanyahu always choosing to go through the red lights that were put in place by the Biden administration when they were urging for a ceasefire and trying to prevent Israel from moving ahead at various phases in the war. But it's believed now that even as the Biden administration is just less than 2 months now from leaving office, that there was new pressure being put on Israel to reach a ceasefire agreement at this time. Part of that pressure relates to the potential that the United States might allow a UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire, even without the return of the hostages, to pass. It would categorize Israel as a danger to world safety, which would allow other countries then to put in place economic sanctions against Israel, something certainly that Israel didn't want to see happen. That would be a horrific parting shot from the Biden administration to the state of Israel on its way out the door, and also that many of the weapons that Israel depends on the United States for as part of a MOU understanding that Israel has with the United States. Many of these weapons have been slow walked to Israel, and Israel now, with this agreement, will be able to get those weapons quickly transferred to Israel. Also, we saw just immediately after the ceasefire went into place that France announced that it may not, in fact, act on the arrest warrants that the ICC issued last week against Prime Minister Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. So that might be another carrot that was offered at this time to push Israel into a ceasefire now.
We heard from President Biden yesterday after all the discussion had kind of come out about the ceasefire and Israel agreeing to it. We heard from Netanyahu and then Biden. So what stood out to you about what Biden had to say as he addressed the American people and, of course, the people in Israel?
Well, I think that that Biden established that this could be the end of hostilities. I do think that this is the end of a phase in the war now, but you really did hear very different statements between President Biden and Prime Minister Netanyahu when he made his address. When Netanyahu spoke, he talked about turning the attention back towards the Gaza Strip, isolating Hamas in Gaza. Israel certainly wants to make sure that Hamas is finished off in the Gaza Strip, both militarily and as the political force running the Strip. That's not something that really Joe Biden talked about, even though this morning he's been talking about the idea of a renewed push toward a Gaza ceasefire as well. And Prime Minister Netanyahu also saying that the first reason for moving ahead with the ceasefire now is for Israel and the IDF to turn its attention to Iran, specifying that he would not elaborate on what that means further. So perhaps Israel thought that closing this phase of the conflict with Lebanon was a way to free up the Israeli Air Force to deal with Iran in the future. And I think it's also important to note for both parties here, both Netanyahu and Biden, that this 60-day drawdown of Israeli troops from southern Lebanon actually corresponds to the transition between the Biden White House and a Trump White House. And so I think what remains to be seen is, what does this, if this ceasefire holds at all, what does it look like in 60 days from now?
And I do want to pop this post back up from the Israel War Room. Again, they said around 5 hours into that ceasefire, the IDF reports multiple vehicles carrying suspected terrorists entered a restricted area in southern Lebanon, violating the agreement. Again, that is a technical violation. Do you think overall this is going to have any sort of impact on the ceasefire as a whole? And are there concerns that Hezbollah will violate the ceasefire in a bigger way?
Well, there's certainly concerns that Hezbollah will violate the ceasefire. They'll certainly be willing and attempting to test all of the mechanisms that the ceasefire agreement has in place to see what they can get away with, what they can't get away with. The IDF still maintaining some degree of freedom of operation in southern Lebanon during this drawdown period. The IDF won't be initiating attacks on Hezbollah positions that might exist already, but certainly if they sense that Hezbollah operatives are moving toward them, or if there's a danger to Israeli troops or a new violation of the agreement, that they will be able to act and have already fired warning shots towards those suspects. It's reported that they turned around and went back. But I think a big question here is the Lebanese army, which is supposed to come in and essentially replace the IDF. Big questions about whether the Lebanese army is capable of that task, and even bigger questions about whether Hezbollah can infiltrate the Lebanese army, as it has on multiple occasions in the past. Perhaps Israel's just this agreement is just inviting Hezbollah down into southern Lebanon in other clothing, dressed as members of the Lebanese army.
I do have to ask, because you touched on this toward the beginning here, but what implications, what impact could this ceasefire deal really have on the situation in Gaza between Israel and Hamas?
Well, the prime minister said that this would isolate Hamas. Yeah, Hamas always hoped that Hezbollah would provide some sort of backing, that if Israel would need to deal with the second front simultaneously, as it has in southern Lebanon, that it would have to divert much of its military apparatus from the Gaza Strip. Now, potentially, Israel will be able to restore a stronger presence in Gaza. That could include the taking over the distribution of humanitarian aid and pushing to make sure that Hamas is not able to regroup and retake control of the Gaza Strip, which is what Hamas ultimately wants to achieve at the end of this war. And it could push Hamas into a situation where they see, if they no longer have the backing of Hezbollah, that they're no longer supporting them in the military effort, that they may feel that it is in their best interest also to cut their losses at this time and potentially to release hostages and get into a ceasefire agreement before Israel continues to completely eliminate them from Gaza.
All right. Alex Traiman, as always, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show and break all of the developments down here. Again, that ceasefire taking effect just hours ago, so we're going to continue to cover all this. Anything else you want to add before I let you go?
Well, I do think that the timing of this agreement is worthwhile to take note of. As I mentioned, within 60 days from now, there's going to be a new U.S. administration, and I think that really can change the paradigms on all of the fronts, both with regard to what happens in Gaza and perhaps Israel entering into the ceasefire agreement in southern Lebanon to buy it 60 more days of freedom of operation in Gaza. We don't know what kind of push or what kind of threats the Biden administration might put on Israel to reach a Gaza ceasefire in these next several weeks. And certainly also what permissions, potentially a green light that the Trump administration could give Israel once it takes office on January 20th to go and attack the head of this terror octopus, the organization that's in a sense controlling Hezbollah, that has funded Hezbollah and armed them as well as Hamas, and to finally to take out their nuclear facilities and promote regime change.
All right. Alex, thank you again for taking the time to join us. I'm sure we're going to be having you on here quite a bit over the coming weeks. Thank you again for being here, as always.
Thanks so much, Josh.
And I do want to take you out to this post here that we are just getting on X. This is coming in from President Biden again moments ago. He says over the coming days, the U.S. will make another push with Turkey, Egypt, Qatar, Israel, and others to achieve a ceasefire in Gaza with the hostages released and an end to the war without Hamas in power.